This was a really powerful piece of writing. Hello everybody, I just got back from Istanbul and I finished Small Boat about a week ago when I was on my way out. Small Boat was longlisted and now shortlisted for the International Booker this year, and it's a short novel about real life events that happened in 2022. So there was a disaster in the Channel back then, and a small boat full of migrants trying to travel from France to the UK unfortunately sank. And because the French and the English rescue services both thought that the boat was in the waters of the other and that it wasn't their responsibility, unfortunately 27 people lost their lives and only 2 survived. Small Boat basically explores culpability and responsibility and our kind of collective attitudes towards global inequality and migration, and it's told from the point of view predominantly of one of the call handlers in France. So Small Boat is in 3 parts, and before we start, can we just take a moment to just have a look at this cover and how devastating it is. So from a distance it just looks like the ocean and you've got the small boat in the middle there, but if you look close you can see that the ocean is made up of bodies, and you can see them all there, and that's what it's made of. And I didn't realise that to start off with, and when I noticed that, it's just so devastating. And so I just want to take a moment to discuss how upsetting and powerful the cover is. Small Boat is written in 3 parts, and 2 of them are from the point of view of the call handler that was on the French side that night. It's fictionalized. Obviously all of it is a work of fiction. These characters aren't real, but it is based on real life events. So the first part of it, you've got this woman in an interview with a police officer explaining kind of what happened that night, and throughout it she is non-emotional. She is stoic and she is giving the facts, and she doesn't seem to have any kind of connection to the events. She is basically saying this was not my fault, and it doesn't matter what my attitude is to these migrants, it wouldn't have saved them. It doesn't matter what I said to them, that wouldn't have saved them. It's not my fault that they got in the boat in the first place. It's not me that kind of told them to, So basically, stoically kind of going through all these kind of psychological loopholes to explain why none of this is her fault. And even if it was her fault, there's loads of other people culpable as well. And it's throughout the narrative something just feels off. And I remember during the first part of this book it wasn't meeting my expectations, because obviously the book had been sold to me as it's about someone, it's exploring kind of guilt and responsibility and things like that, and the main character just reads like a psychopath, like a sociopath. There's absolutely no kind of emotion there at all. It's very much kind of like pontificating on the finer details and trying to find little psychological loopholes, and just absolutely refusing to have any emotion. And the police officer in front of her is very much getting frustrated, why aren't you having a human reaction to the situation? Why are you just sat there without any kind of remorse, without any kind of, and the main character is very much kind of well, what use would my remorse be to these people? What difference does it make what my attitude is? I'm a call handler, I'm there, I have to be detached because otherwise I can't do my job. And like, it just didn't ring true. Just something felt really off about it, because, you know, usually there will be two kinds of reaction that you get in this sort of situation, where somebody in a very responsible job has, you know, some level of you know, they could have saved somebody and, you know, didn't manage to. And the most common is obviously kind of absolutely in pieces, you know, this is my fault, it eats them alive. And, you know, that kind of remorseful kind of, oh, this is all my fault, and usually the people around them are very much kind of like, no, you did all you could. You know, there's that kind of response. And then there's the kind of, I did it, you know, it wasn't my thing, it's not my fault kind of thing, you know. And you get that kind of other side of the emotion where you're in absolute denial, and the main character doesn't seem to be in either of these positions. She's just like, well, you know, and just kind of going over the cold hard facts, and it just felt really eerie and psychologically taut. And like, it's just a really, like, it's just a fascinating chapter. It's very readable. Like, I absolutely barreled through it. That was part one, and I think part one is a lot of people's favorite part of the book. Obviously, I've put spoilers in the title. I am going to spoil the entire book, so from, you know, from now on, you know, obviously if you are going to read it, then absolutely do not go any further, because I'm going to kind of, you know, tell you kind of where it goes. Then you've got part two of the book, which is just a very well written imagination of what it would feel like to be those migrants on that boat. And at first I thought, you know, is this, you know, you already have kind of hinting at it and how terrible it would have been, and a lot of that kind of bleeds through from the police officer's perspective, you know, how terrible it must have been for those migrants on that sea to be slowly drowning, and to feel that help wasn't coming. And so I wasn't sure how much this chapter would actually add, but oh my goodness, it was, yeah, it just, it's so well written, and it just basically, it's like when you can see a disaster happening and you just want to step in and stop it and do something, and it's unfolding, and just knowing that things could have been different if different things had happened. It's just absolutely devastating. And it's basically the middle part of the book, I did actually find after reading it, was extremely necessary, but very, very difficult to read. Very difficult to read. Obviously, again, it's a fictionalization, but it's get a sense of what it might have been like out there on that night. Then the third part, we go back to our call handler, and she's running along the coast, and we find out a little bit more about her, and she's psychologically warring with herself and explaining to, you know, why, you know, back and forth, why, you know, why she's not ultimately responsible for this tragedy. During this third part of the book, we realise slowly that actually part one is not her. She didn't go in to speak to the police. That's kind of an argument that she's having with herself in her head. And you realise that because, you know, obviously the police officer looks slightly like her, you know, that's her talking to herself, and that's her kind of imagining what it would be like to kind of try and justify herself, and she hasn't gone in. And she's just, and you realise that she is absolutely riddled with guilt. She's absolutely, is tearing her apart. It's completely destroying her. And all of this kind of back and forth in her head is self-justification, and you realise that she is actually having a very, very human response to, you know, how she behaved on that night, and how her actions led to, you know, to basically to 27 people dying and not being rescued. It does actually transpire that there were kind of big mistakes made, and she's kind of can't, and often, you know, if someone's in a very, very responsible position, time is of the essence, and you don't always remember kind of what, you know, what steps you took and why, and you can't always account for your actions in, you know, in the heat of working environment like that. So it's not clear whether her attitude led to her not, you know, her kind of emotional kind of empathy fatigue led to kind of not actions not being taken. Her frustrations on the night led to kind of not sending out rescue that could have been sent. She's torturing herself. She doesn't know. She doesn't know how much it was her fault, but she feels it. And like the last chapter just basically recontextualizes the rest of the book. Like the first part, you realise that all of that kind of, the reason why it felt off was because it is off. That's not how she's feeling at all. But also she is not willing to take on the entire burden of responsibility for the entire of the world's inequalities, and there is that kind of this is unfair feeling kind of running through it as well. And the ripples kind of extend out. She blames the ocean, she blames the people, everybody else, she blames everybody's situation, our collective ignorance and our collective kind of looking away from other people's situations, and our kind of poo-pooing of the hardships that they go through, and the way that we're sat here in comfort, like completely ignoring the plight of so many people. And it's very, very clever from that point of view, because it's not just talking about her culpability, but about everybody's culpability. It's a very clever book from that point of view. And when I finished it, I was sat in Luton. I was reading in Luton the day before we flew out, and like I spent about an hour trying to write down my thoughts. I've done a Goodreads review. I was writing on other people's YouTube videos about it, because I just wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to, because other people have actually interpreted this slightly differently. And that's interesting, because I think some people felt there was some ambiguity about whether or not part one was supposed to have happened or not. I didn't feel it was ambiguous. I felt that that the third part did make it clear that the first part was in her head. But I do agree that it was kind of written in quite an ambiguous way, and there are other interpretations of that as well. When I first started the book, I wasn't sure it was going to live up to my expectations of it, mainly because obviously there was a very kind of detached, non-human feeling from the first part that, you know, that just made me feel a bit icky. But by the end, kind of it all wraps up, and this is a very, very clever piece of writing. It's very powerful, and I do think everybody should read it. It's not very long. It's only let me see how many pages. About 120 pages. It's absolutely worth taking your time to read this one, I would say. Will it win the International Booker? I would say this is a contender. I would absolutely say this is a contender. But I also suspect that it's not going to be what we expect it to be. I think they're probably going to. I think the winner's probably going to be something a little bit more, you know, obscure, that's going to irritate people personally. Yeah, this was a fantastic book. I'm very, very glad that I read it, and would encourage you all to pick it up and do the same. I am trying to make my way through the entire shortlist. So yeah, I think the next one is going to be on the calculation of volume, if I indeed get through it. I have started it already. So I will see you soon for another review. Take care.